much, Sandy. Thank you all. It's so great to be here. My parents immigrated to Taiwan and met at UC Berkeley. My brother's named after the Lawrence Observatory, so I'm something of a local product. My father got his PhD in physics at Berkeley and generated 69 patents over his career at GE and IBM. I was born in Schenectady, New York, but I have to say, yes, Schenectady, New York, where my father was at GE. But I have to say, every time someone asks me whether I'm from the West Coast, I take it as a compliment. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Andrew Yang. I'm running for president as a Democrat in 2020. And you all have been incredible activists and leaders in the Asian American community for years. And most of you had never heard of me until maybe just now, or maybe like 6 months ago. It's like, who is this person and how is he running for president at this point? So I'm going to retrace my steps and let you know why I'm here. And then hopefully you'll see why I'm running and why we need to step up at the highest levels. So I grew up in upstate New York. I went to Brown University, studied economics and political science, and I went to law school at Columbia, like some of your children probably. And I was an unhappy attorney for 5 months in New York, thought it was not a great job. And so I left, as Sandy said, I left to start a business. I left to start a technology business in the first dot-com bubble that did not work out. But then I worked at another healthcare software company, and then I became the head of an education company that grew to become #1 in the United States and was acquired by a public company in 2009. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been working in tech and business. And then in 2009, when my company was acquired, you all remember that was the depths of the financial crisis, where it's like the financial sector was exploding and mortgages were all going under. And so at that point, I felt like there was something deeply wrong with what was going on in the country. And at the time, I thought the best thing I could do would be to train hundreds of young entrepreneurs to go work in cities like Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Baltimore, New Orleans, Birmingham, to build new businesses. I thought that we had too much talent going to Wall Street and Silicon Valley and not enough going to the Midwest and South, and that was going to end up tearing our country apart and leading to a very divided economy and society. So I came up with this in 2011. I quit my job. I donated $120,000 of my own to seed Venture for America. I started calling wealthy friends, asking them, do you love America? The savvy among them said, what does it mean if I say yes? And then I said, at least $10,000. And so 12 people said, I love America for $10,000. So our budget was $250,000. It grew and grew. This year our budget's around $7 million, thousands of applicants, hundreds of fellows, created several thousand jobs. I was awarded presidential ambassadorship from the Obama White House. A documentary was made about my organization that's now on Netflix, if you like documentaries. And so I spent 7 years traveling the Midwest and the South. How many of you all are from the West Coast? East Coast like me, New York? Midwest? South? Pacific Northwest? So I had never been to Michigan, Ohio, Alabama before running Venture for America. And I have to say, it was a real eye-opener, where a woman in Ohio said to me, around here, change is a 4-letter word. And I did not know what she meant. And then over time, I grew to understand what she meant was that in Ohio, change meant businesses closing and people leaving. Where if you were very, very talented in Northeast Ohio, the goal was to leave. And so she started having a more and more negative attitude about progress and change. But this really hit home to me when Donald Trump became our president in 2016. Now, some of you, had different reactions to Donald Trump becoming president, but I saw this as a massive cry for help. I said, wow, this country must be getting really desperate if we elected that guy, the narcissist reality star, as our president. There must have been like a lot of pain, a lot of anger, a lot of distress. And so I started looking into why he won, and there's a very, very strong direct correlation upward between the adoption of industrial robots in a voting district and the movement towards Donald Trump. There's one very clear reason why Donald Trump is our president today. It is that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa, all of the swing states that Donald Trump needed to win and did win. And how many of you all work in technology here in Silicon Valley? Some of you. So if you work here, you know that what we did to the manufacturing workers, we're about to do to the retail workers, the call center workers, the truck drivers, the fast food workers, and on through the economy. We are in the third inning of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of the world. And the third inning has brought us Donald Trump. The fourth, fifth, sixth innings will bring their own set of problems. And so I was coming to grips with this. Again, I started an organization to create jobs. I created several thousand jobs around the US. And I realized that my organization was pouring water into a bathtub that has a giant hole ripped in the bottom. And so then what do you do about the giant hole ripped in the bottom? So I wrote a book called The War on Normal People about what's happening in the economy. And then I started to go to Washington, D.C., visiting with my friends who are policymakers and lawmakers, saying, guys, what are we going to do about this economic transformation? And what do you all think that the lawmakers and policymakers said to me when I asked them this question? Not much one can do. The three answers I got were, we cannot talk about that, we should study that further, and the third, the most reasonable, competent sounding one was, we must educate and retrain Americans for the jobs of the future. And then I said, I looked at the independent studies, and the effectiveness rate of government-funded retraining programs are approximately 0%. The independent studies have it at between 0 and 15%, and fewer than 10% of American workers qualify for retraining programs anyway. It's not like when a mall closes, there's an army of government employees standing there being like, oh, we're here to retrain you. Like, that doesn't happen in real life. And 30% of malls are going to close in the next 4 years. The average retail worker is a 39-year-old woman with a high school education making between $11 and $12 an hour. So when I realized that our government was completely out to lunch on this, really the elephant in the room that led to Donald Trump being elected and is changing our economy and society forever, I realized it's like, wow, like if our political system does not wake up to this reality, my kids, your kids, are going to grow up in a very, very different country than I grew up in. And that country, I'm going to suggest, is not going to necessarily be embracing Asian Americans, because this country is heading towards being majority minority in 2045, which is only 27 years away. It's like one and a half generations. And the history of the world does not have many examples of a dominant financial and political ethnic group voluntarily relinquishing its dominance when other groups become more numerous. That's actually not historically normal. The norm is unfortunately in the other direction. And that's going to be compounded by the fact that the American government, the American culture likes to have a boogeyman or an enemy. And who do we all think the most likely boogeyman is going to be of this next generation? It's likely to be China. And so you're going to see this increasingly restive, insecure, and economically insecure white shrinking majority class looking for enemies and scapegoats, because it's very, very hard to tell the people that are losing their manufacturing jobs and truck driving jobs, like, hey, it's progress. They're going to find some place to cast blame. And so this is what we have to address. We have to wake people up to the fact that it's not immigrants, it's not whatever else we're blaming. It's not like, you know, build a wall. It's not like irresponsible businesses. It's the fact that we're going through the series of economic and technological transformations that just make human beings less relevant to more and more businesses. And I mentioned truckers. Being a truck driver is the most common job in 29 states in this country. Now, we don't know that because I don't know many Asian American truck drivers, but there are 3.5 million truckers in this country. Average age 49, 94% male, average education high school. They make $46,000 a year. Now, how long do we think it's going to be before the robot trucks start hitting the highways? 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. When I talk to my friends in Silicon Valley, they tell me it's 5 to 10 years. Now, when those robot trucks start hitting the highways, how do we think these hundreds of thousands, these millions of truckers are going to take it? Not well. And only 13% of them are unionized. You can't even negotiate a grand solution. Like 87% of them are in mom and pop businesses. So what do we think the odds are of some truckers getting drunk, saying like, no robot's going to take my job, and then like trashing robot trucks or rioting or like parking their truck across the highway, it strikes me that that's actually very likely, because about 100,000 of them are ex-military, and 350,000 of them own their own trucks. So imagine sinking your life savings into owning a truck and then having a robot truck that you can't compete against. So this is the reality. Now this is the stuff our politicians will not talk about. And our politicians will not talk about it because they don't understand technology, they tend not to understand the economy, and they certainly don't understand the way those interact. So this is why I am running for president. I'm running for president to wake people up to the fact that the real problems are not immigrants, but the real problems, it's not even a problem if we get ourselves together as a society, is that progress is continuing at such a rapid pace that more and more Americans are in danger of being left behind. So my platform revolves around a few big ideas. The first is a universal basic income where every American citizen gets $1,000 a month, free and clear, no questions asked. And that would be transformative for tens of millions of American families. Education rates would go up, health would go up, mental health would go up, domestic violence would go down, hospital visits would go down. It would make Americans more rational and open and optimistic about the future. Because right now, 57% of Americans can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. And if you can't pay your bills, it has the functional impact of decreasing your IQ by 13 points, which is one standard deviation. So if anyone here thinks America is getting dumber, it is. It's getting dumber because people can't pay their bills, and not being able to pay your bills actually makes you less rational. So that's the first big step, which I have branded the freedom dividend because Americans love freedom. It tested much better as the freedom dividend than it did anything else. So number one is the freedom dividend. Number two is trying to get health care off the backs of American families and businesses. Some of you are probably doctors. Raise your hand if you're a doctor. How do you feel about this? No doctors? Excellent. Nurse. That's even better. It's even better, Lily. So one of the problems that's making Americans miserable is that 94% of the new jobs created since 2005 have been temporary gig or contractor jobs that don't have health care benefits. And so people are struggling with their health care. So we need to separate health care from work, particularly in an era where fewer and fewer Americans are going to have full-time jobs anyway. And then the third thing is we have to come up with better ways to measure our economic progress, because GDP is something we made up almost 100 years ago, and it's going to keep going up and up even as more and more Americans get left behind. So we need to start evolving GDP to include things like mental health, childhood success rates, environmental quality, median income and affordability, and get people focused around actually trying to improve Americans' ways of life, because we all know that you deliver what you measure. And right now, this society is measuring the wrong things. So the inventor of GDP was a guy, he's an immigrant actually, you guys will like this, named Simon Kuznets. He came up with it during the Great Depression. And then he said at the time, this is a terrible measurement for national well-being and we should not use it as that. And yet that's exactly what we've done almost 100 years later. So Donald Trump is president today in part because he identified a series of problems. But then his solutions were freeze time, turn the clock backwards, build a wall, keep immigrants out. And I want to do the exact opposite, where we need to move the clock forward. We need to move our society and government forward. We need to have people actually become excited about the future we're entering, because the alternative is going to be disastrous for Asian Americans and for all Americans. And the message I deliver to the people of Iowa, New Hampshire, and across the country is that the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who loves math. So that is all why I'm running for president today. I'm thrilled to be here with you. Our campaign's growing by leaps and bounds every single day, but you all are leaders. I've admired many of your work, like much of your work from afar, and would absolutely love to get to know you, have you get to know me, and take some questions. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Sandy, for having me today. Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you.
I think that there are lots of open discussion and questions. Anybody?
Yeah, shout it out. That's why I have the mic and you don't. I'll give you guys the mic.
Okay,
question. Oh, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, Andrew, my name is Andrew Jan as well. I like this freedom dividends, and I know, but most of our Asian American or Chinese American primarily over here, they're all above the middle age and above the middle income as well. So how your policy could persuade or penetrate the whole American here, other than Asian American? Thank you.
Sure. So I spoke to a group of 70 CEOs that were convened by JP Morgan about the freedom dividend. And what I suggested to them is what I suggest to Asian Americans is that markets and consumers will be healthier when people have money to spend. So if you're doing well as an Asian American, I sense that many of us are doing well in this room, like our businesses, our investments will be in position to do better if the American consumer has actual money to spend in our businesses, like and able to participate in our financial system and in other ways. And plus, we would receive the freedom dividend too. This is not a system where you have to make below a certain amount of money to get the freedom dividend, because we have to destigmatize it and make it essentially a right of citizenship. Because Americans don't like handouts. Americans don't like feeling like, oh, you know, like someone's better than me and I'm getting this and you're not. So the way to destigmatize, say like everyone can get it, everyone opts in. So that's why I think it'll be appealing to people at every level of America, because even for us, even though we're quite prosperous and our kids are educated and whatnot, it'll still be a massive stress relief knowing that our kids also are going to get $1,000 a month at age 18. And so if they want to go to school, they'll have it partially paid for, et cetera, et cetera. And we can do it in a way that puts the agency and decision-making into the hands of the individual as opposed to having the government make that decision. Lily.
Yeah, hi, Andrew. Thank you so much. So I'm so glad that you talk about healthcare, particularly mental health. So what is your platform to engage the voters and connect with the people in healthcare in general and mental health?
So this country is experiencing a mental health crisis. I don't know how many of you have experienced that in some ways individually. My brother is a psychology professor at NYU, and our parents are very proud. And one of my policy elements is to have a psychologist in the White House, because it actually doesn't make any sense to have people that have like access to nuclear weapons and whatnot without some sort of mental health professional around. And I thought of this before our current president. So we can destigmatize issues of mental health very powerfully, and then we need to invest in it significantly at multiple levels. And we need to invest in a way that's more holistic, because right now the Western method tends to rely upon lots of prescription drugs, and the prescription drugs end up sometimes causing their own set of adverse reactions. And so my brother, in his field, he's more of a behavioral and like clinical, drugs are not the first resort. But the problem there is that those processes tend to be more painstaking and they're more expensive oftentimes than just saying here's the drug, but they're better. So we need to invest in those resources and destigmatize and let people know that mental health is something that affects everybody. I think I can do this very effectively because I'm not as much of the macho, so what I mean? Just talk about how everyone struggles. I think that would go a very long way. And my brother has some great policies too, where apparently you can diagnose things quite early for children if you invest the resources to do so. Oh, thanks, Lily.
My name's Andrew Kim. I'm with APAPA. Just quick background, I've been a congressional staffer for about 10 years. I love all of the premises you mentioned. From my time, I've worked with a lot of truck drivers with the Teamsters Union. I love the premise that the technology is the issue, and that the current administration is trying to put a stop to that, or trying to freeze time. I like what you said there. What is some examples of how we can address, for example, truck drivers? Because I talk with those labor unions. What could I tell them that Andrew has in plan for how we can address and mitigate technology disrupting the current industry?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. A lot of Andrews in this room. I spoke to some truck drivers myself last week, and the reaction I got from them was something like, this is bullshit, we should make sure this is never legal to have a robot truck. That was the general reaction. it wasn't this bullshit is not happening, which is the reaction I got a year ago. A year ago, I was like, hey, robots are coming. They're like, no, they're not. That's bullshit. And now they're like, robots are coming. So trucking is a unique situation where you have most common job in 29 states. In addition to the 3.5 million truckers, you have another 5 million Americans who work in truck stops, motels, and diners that count on the truck stopping. So this is going to be devastating for hundreds of communities around the country. Now, on the flip side, here in Silicon Valley, they are gunning for this because the cost savings are $168 billion per year in not just labor, but fuel efficiency, equipment utilization, fewer accidents. 4,000 Americans die in accidents with trucks every year, so this will probably save hundreds of lives. So it's very difficult to argue we should not do this. We should do it, but the goal should be to include the truckers in some of the incredible value gains. Now, that's not going to happen by itself. So President Yang's plan, you can tell the truckers, is to have a trucking transition czar, probably Andy Stern, the former head of the SEIU, who will go in and say, look, self-driving truck companies, you're about to save tens of billions of dollars, and that is great. But some of that needs to go to the truckers to create this long-term transition window for them, because without that, we're heading towards civil unrest and likely violence. So trucker transitions are plus freedom dividend should equal, hopefully, because we're actually going to be saving enough money, we could, and I'm not recommending this, but we could actually pay the truckers their full salaries just to sit at home, because the savings are that vast. You can believe that. So we need to split it up a little bit. Yes, Anthony. Oh, sorry, he had one. My bad, sorry.
The economy is an important part of being a president, but it's not the only part. How would you handle Russia's aggression in the Ukraine and Crimea?
Yes. So I think it's unfathomable that we know Russia's hacking our elections and everyone's like, well, they're doing it again. I mean, that's crazy. Like, I feel like the American government should say, look, very clearly, if we can verify that you are tampering with our elections, we'll consider that an act of aggression, and then we will respond very unkindly in various ways, freezing assets, doing something that the oligarchs in Russia would not like. Generally speaking, in terms of my foreign policy stance, I think our foreign policy actually reflects how we're doing at home, and that the weaker we are at home, then the more erratic and unreliable we get abroad. And then if we're doing really well at home, then people abroad regard us as more reliable and willing to invest for the medium and long term. I think one of the mistakes that American presidents have made over the last couple of decades is they've imagined that we're capable of doing many things that we are not capable of doing. And so I would be very reluctant to invest American resources, lives, treasure abroad unless there's a very, very clearly defined goal that I thought we could attain. And so I'm very restrained about, like I think that the American outlook has gotten us into disaster after disaster over the last couple of decades, honestly.
So this goes back to the trucking one because, and this is actually helping me understand more about like how you're looking at the systematic view and such. So we hear it for the truckers, we hear it for the civil unrest part. How are you planning to talk to the businesses to convince them otherwise that, because sometimes money moves more than civil unrest or the fear of that?
Yeah, so again, and one of the reasons I think I'm a very effective messenger for this is I talk to CEOs. I'm friends with many tech CEOs, and Sam Altman of Y Combinator is going to endorse me next week along with like about 80 other techies. And so the tech CEOs regard me as like a capitalist and business person, which I am. And what I suggest to them is like, look, you're just going to be doing better if your customers are more stable and have more money to spend and are not rioting. So it's like a pro-business measure that most CEOs regard as a necessary step at some point. So I think people sense that I'm actually very pro-business because I am. I've run a company, I've started companies, I'm a serial entrepreneur, which I think makes me a really effective messenger for this.
Yeah. You know, Andrew, you being a Chinese American and U.S.-China relation, as you just mentioned, is not that good at all. China is both, and increasingly so, both a bogus man and a real competitor, if not a fierce adversary. So you being Chinese American running for the president of the United States, how does that cut it?
Yes. So we have a running joke in the office about what Donald Trump's nickname will be for me. And we've come up with Comrade Yang. You know, it's like, oh, Comrade Yang at it again. So, which will be a very good day for the campaign when he decides to give me a nickname. So I'm a very proud Chinese American, Asian American. I think that having someone like me on the national stage would actually be a very, very positive thing for the community on multiple levels. I certainly think that there's going to be some mistrust among some subset of Americans about like having an Asian American president, though I think after people spend some time with me, that does disappear. I've been to Iowa 7 times. I'm going back for an 8th time to headline a progressive event called Progress Iowa, December 20th. And when I talk to the Democrats of Iowa and New Hampshire, there's zero concern about my ethnic background. If anything, the smart Asian guy actually tends to work pretty well because if I'm talking about technology and numbers and math, they're like, yeah, he sounds like he knows what he's talking about. Like this guy's definitely done his homework. Yeah, it's 2 + 2. But I do want to suggest a few things about having an Asian American run for president. So we tend to be relatively structured and responsible as a community, but the presidency, as Sandy pointed out before, may be an exception to how this goes, where if Asian Americans wait for our turn, it will never arrive. I mean, that's just the truth of it. Like, if we wait for someone to say, hey, it's like time for this person to run for president, like, don't hold your breath. that's not happening. So it's going to have to be us putting ourselves forward and saying, look, oh my gosh, the Russians got me. No. Sorry. Anyway. So we're going to have to put ourselves forward and say, look, we have a vision for the country, we can contribute, we can lead at the very highest levels, and that's the only way we're going to take a true leadership position in the society. The second thing is that Asian Americans have been somewhat marginalized politically for a number of reasons, and I cannot tell you how grateful I am to all of you here because you're all trying to counteract that. But you all know you're going against the grain because Asian Americans do not see politics as like a natural realm for them or competition. They feel somewhat still like foreign. They don't think it matters. They don't think political leaders care about them. And this election is an opportunity for us because we can actually, so I was talking to Sandy and some others. So California moved its voting date up where it is going to be the 5th state this time in the Democratic primary. So you have Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, and then California. And in a very, very diverse field, it is not going to be decided by California. So California, by the time you guys vote in the primaries traditionally, it doesn't matter, it's already over. But this time, it will not be over. This time, Asian Americans can actually help decide who's going to be the president of the United States. And if I'm still in that picture, I have a feeling I'm going to get a significant proportion of the Asian Americans in California. Like, we have a chance to make a real difference on the political level. And the third thing, and the sort of the most personal element of it, is that as an Asian American man, I have had this sense, and some of you may have this sense as well, that I'm allowed to become this successful, but I'm not allowed to become this successful. And certainly that is true in the political realm. And that's what we have to change, really. Because like many of you, I have been with senators and presidents and governors and the rest of it, and have realized what you all have realized as well, which is that we are just as smart, just as good, just as patriotic, just as moral as any of them, and that we can lead at the very highest levels. And so running for president as a Chinese American, I'm very, very excited about the potential of the campaign to help further a vision of what we can be in this society, that we are just as American as anyone else.